Good evening, and welcome to another spooky episode of Codo Cinema, the podcast show where I talk about movies. I bid you welcome as your host, Mark Codo, aka Codoman. And to continue with Codo Cinema Horror Month, I'm going to talk about a movie from the collection of Tim Burton. When it comes to Tim Burton movies, Tim Burton has a style, has a unique style when it comes to his movies. Most notably, the gothic elements that he puts into his movies, including his collaborations as well. Such whereas Danny Elfman, Johnny Depp, Christopher Lee, Michael Goff, Michael Keaton, Danny DeVito, or among many other actors too. But of course, with his movies are pretty good. And for this episode, I'm going to talk about one of his movies. Now, this movie I'm going to talk about, it is celebrating its 25th anniversary, and that movie would be Sleepy Hollow. Ooh, that one is gonna be a good one to talk about. Right, Mike?
That is right, Mark. Good evening, Mark, and good evening to everyone.
Yes, good evening, Mike. Mike is with me as a guest star on this episode. And we're both going to be talking about Sleepy Hollow, the 1999 gothic supernatural horror film directed by legendary Tim Burton. It is a film adaptation loosely based on Washington Irving's 1820 short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and stars Johnny Depp and Christina Ricci with Miranda Richardson, Michael Gambon, Casper Van Dien, Christopher Lee, and Jeffrey Jones in supporting roles. The plot follows police constable Ichabod Crane, played by Johnny Depp, who is sent from New York City to investigate a series of murders in the village of Sleepy Hollow by a mysterious headless horseman. Now, as I mentioned, the film is directed by Tim Burton, with the screenplay written by Andrew Kevin Walker, who also serves as one of the story writers, including Kevin Yeager, who, fun fact, Kevin Yeager was one of the original directors who was going to direct Sleepy Hollow, but unfortunately Tim Burton took over the role. Now, the film is produced by Adam Schroeder, Larry Franco, and Scott Rudin. And of course, we got production companies Paramount Pictures, Mandalay Pictures, Scott Rudin Productions, American Zoetrope, and Tim Burton Productions. Plus, the film's budget was $70 to $100 million, and the film grossed over $207.1 million. The development of this film began in 1993 at Paramount Pictures, with Kevin Yeager originally set to direct, including Andrew Kevin Walker's script as a low-budget slasher film. Unfortunately, there were disagreements with Paramount Pictures, resulted in Yeager being demoted to prosthetic makeup designer, and Tim Burton taking over the directing position in June of 1998. And filming took place from November 1998 to May 1999. And of course, the film was an international co-production between Germany and the United States. The film was released on November 17th of 1999 at Mann's Chinese Theater, and of course, a November 19th release date of 1999 in the United States. Of course, the critical reception was well received from critics, with many praising the performances, direction, screenplay, and Danny Elfman's musical score, as well as his dark humor, visual effects, and atmosphere. Plus, it took home the Academy Award for Best Art Direction. That's a lot to say right there, right?
That's totally right, Mark. And of course, not to mention, it was also nominated for 2 Oscars. One of them is Best Cinematography and Best Costume Design. Colleen Atwood.
That's right. Colleen Atwood was one of the costume designers for Sleepy Hollow. Plus, she's also done a couple of other Tim Burton films as a costume designer too. Like, she would do the costume design for the live-action remake of Alice in Wonderland, and of course, most recently, she did the costume for Beetlejuice, which came out this year.
And of course, a Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them.
That's right. Now, just to give a brief background, on my end, I'm not very familiar with the story of Sleepy Hollow. I have heard of the characters, most notably most notably Ichabod Crane and the Headless Horseman. And here's a fun fact. Here's a fun fact. I actually played two different composition scores from the Sleepy Hollow story, and it was a made for string orchestra back in high school. I actually played this back in high school, and I'm pretty sure back in middle school as well. Like we played two versions. We played like two different movements. One to focus on Ichabod Crane. Then the other one was based on the Headless Horseman or the Hessian Trooper. And I remember to this day that was like my introduction to Sleepy Hollow a little bit, but it wasn't until I saw a clip from Walt Disney's The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, where it featured a segment of Sleepy Hollow.
It's basically in two stories. The first story talks about Mr. Toad, and the other talks about Sleepy Hollow.
And that's true. And one of the segments features Sleepy Hollow. That's where Ichabod Crane encounters the Headless Horseman.
And there's also another version they did it too, which is Wishbone: The Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
That's right. The TV show Wishbone did that too. I never saw it, but I have seen a couple of episodes of Wishbone. I mean, hey, what's the story?
That's totally true.
Now, with Tim Burton's take on Sleepy Hollow, it's a little different compared to the story and the way how Walt Disney did it back in 1949. The movie that Tim Burton did was very interesting. I actually enjoyed it.
I actually enjoyed it too.
I mean, that's true. I mean, come on, it's Tim Burton, right?
He's basically hit or miss.
That's true. I mean, Tim Burton has been hit or miss with his movies, but at the same time, still good to look at.
And of course, Tim Burton was coming off the heels of Pee-wee's Big Adventure movie. Then other films came out after Pee-wee's Big Adventure was Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands,
including Tim Burton's Batman and Batman Returns, among many other films like Mars Attacks, Corpse Bride, Frankenweenie, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Planet of the Apes, Alice in Wonderland, Dumbo, among many other films as well.
Including Ed Wood.
That's true.
And of course, this is the second R-rated film that Tim Burton has ever directed it.
That's true. This is Tim Burton's second R-rated movie following
Ed Wood.
Ed Wood. I've never seen Ed Wood. I've heard of the movie, but also the filmmaker too, because Ed Wood is a filmmaker. And with that being said, I mentioned American Zoetrope, and the man who is involved with American Zoetrope is none other than Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah, Francis Ford Coppola, the guy who directed the first two Godfather movies.
He directed the third one too.
Oh yeah, the Godfather trilogy.
He was also involved in American Graffiti,
Apocalypse Now.
That's right. And of course, he also directed Bram Stoker's Dracula as well.
And I'm pretty sure he directed The Outsiders.
That's right. And of course, Francis Ford Coppola is the executive producer for Sleepy Hollow. So anyway, with that being said, how about we dive into the tale of Sleepy Hollow?
Ooh.
So the movie opens up in 1799. New York City Police Constable Ichabod Crane, being played by Johnny Depp, is dispatched to upstate Dutch hamlet of Sleepy Hollow, which has been plagued by a series of brutal murders. A wealthy father and son and widow, received by the insular town elders, the wealthy Baltus Van Tassel, town Dr. Thomas Lancaster, the Reverend Steenwick, notary James Hardenbrook, and magistrate Samuel Phillipsey. And Ichabod learns that locals believe the killer is the undead apparition of a headless Hessian mercenary from the American Revolutionary War, who rides a black steed in search of his missing head. And this is referring to, you guessed it, the
Headless Horseman.
the Headless Horseman. Now, something I really like about the opening is the fact, like, it kind of sets up pretty well. The opening, we see a stranger in the opening who's actually being played by
Martin Landau.
Martin Landau plays a stranger in the opening, and he gets his head chopped off because he was riding in the middle of the night going somewhere until a Hessian trooper cut off the driver's head, including Martin Landau's head too, and of course the blood. If you notice the blood, it splats onto the pumpkin scarecrow.
Ouch.
I'm pretty sure that was the scarecrow of Jack Skellington.
And of course, not to mention, Martin Landau was uncredited for the role.
That's true, yeah.
And this was his second collaboration with Tim Burton,
following Ed Wood. And then we also get introduced to Ichabod Crane, Johnny Depp's character, who is basically a constable. A constable is just basically an officer. Ichabod was having a conversation with this judge or burgomaster, and this is basically about what is going on in New York City. Burgomaster, who's actually being played by Christopher Lee, he's kind of basically tired of Ichabod's complaints. You hear him in the opening, he's only in it for the opening scene, and he is giving him a task of the crimes that is going on in Sleepy Hollow. Sure, yeah, I mean, this is and of course, he realizes the experiments that Ichabod has. You hear the burgomaster explain to Ichabod about the crimes in Sleepy Hollow, even though he's tired of Ichabod complaining about, the stuff that he complains in New York City.
Constable Crane, this is a song that we heard for you more than once.
That is right. Even though Ichabod Crane, he's standing up. He's standing up for himself. Even though one of the wardens is telling him to stand down.
I stand up for sense and justice.
That's what basically Ichabod Crane is doing. He's trying to stand up for justice. And then the burgomaster is like, "Well, I have a task for you, Ichabod Crane. There is a town, and many people have been getting their heads cut off clean. So you will take these experiments to Sleepy Hollow and find this vigilante and bring him back for our good justice. But remember, it is you, Ichabod Crane. It is you who is being put to the test."
Wow. Well, actually, this is Christopher Lee's first collaboration with Tim Burton, and he also appeared in 4 more Tim Burton movies, which includes Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Corpse Bride, to which both films came out in 2005. He also lent his voice to the Jabberwocky in Alice in Wonderland.
That's right. I was Sleepy Hollow is basically his first Tim Burton film, and of course, collaboration with Tim Burton. By the way,
and also Christopher Lee's final film to collaborate with Tim Burton was Dark Shadows.
That's right.
He only made a cameo appearance in that movie. The same with Sleepy Hollow up until he passed away in 2015.
By the way, some of you may notice, especially in the opening scene between Ichabod and the burgomaster, you notice there's actually wings popping out from behind. There's a shot that is basically an American eagle in the background. You see the American eagle right next to the American flag, but you probably may notice right away when it cuts to just the burgomaster, there are wings popping out from behind, which is actually, if you really think about it, kind of calls back to Christopher Lee's role in Dracula. And this also brings up the fact that Tim Burton actually took inspiration from the Hammer horror films for this movie, because the production design for this movie is very, very good. Reason why, because it is basically the production design is gothic and colorless, but also calling back to some of the Hammer horror films, most notably Christopher Lee's Dracula movies that he was in, and of course some of the Frankenstein movies as well from Hammer horror films as well, including a few other ones too.
Yeah, that's totally right.
And then of course Ichabod, after that whole courtroom scene, Ichabod Crane travels to Sleepy Hollow. We get a musical background from Danny Elfman, and the credits also the credits are also rolling, showing the audience of like who's involved. But I really like the music from Danny Elfman. It gives a very distinct vibe, a very like haunting vibe.
Very haunting.
Yeah, and then of course when Ichabod gets to Sleepy Hollow, he's greeted by Katrina Ann Van Tassel, being played by Christina Ricci, and of course she was playing a game with some kids and some other people as well.
I believe it's called Pickety Witch. The Pickety Witch. Who's got a kiss of that Pickety Witch?
Yeah, it's like and she mistakes Johnny Depp for playing the game. Nice little humor. And then, of course, Casper Van Dyne's character steps in. It's like, wait a minute, we haven't heard your name yet, and it sounded like a fight was about to break out between the two. Although Casper Van Dyne plays Brom Van Brunt, until another voice comes in, and it was Baltus Van Tassel, Michael Gambon's character. He was like, "Come, let's not raise our voices here." And then, of course, he meets up with Ichabod Crane, saying, "Excuse me, young man, if this is something to do with sales or something, we're not interested." But of course, this is based something like that. But Ichabod Crane introduced himself that he was brought here to discover the murders in Sleepy Hollow, and this is where he meets all the other members, which includes Reverend Steenwick, being played by Jeffrey Jones. Magistrate Samuel Phillipsy, being played by Richard Griffiths, Dr. Thomas Lancaster, being played by Ian McDermott, and of course, Notary James Hardenbrook, being played by Michael Goff. Also, fun fact, Michael Goff also appeared in a number of Hammer horror films, plus collaborating with Tim Burton on the first two Tim Burton Batman movies.
Same with Jeffrey Jones, to which he collaborated with Tim Burton before with Beetlejuice, Ed Wood, including Sleepy Hollow.
And also going off topic, we just want to go off topic for a second. Mike, this is your first Tim Burton film overall in this podcast episode. Now, to anybody who's probably listening, me and my buddy Christian Taylor, aka DJ Apollo of Tales of Music and Film, we talked about a few Tim Burton films on this podcast. We talked about Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. Even though Tim Burton didn't direct it, it was Henry Selick who directed it, but it was still a Tim Burton film. It was still a Tim Burton production, and me and Christian Taylor and I, we talked about it. And then, of course, we also talked about the first two Tim Burton Batman movies with Michael Keaton. And we both talked about Batman Returns last year during Codo Cinema Christmas Month. And last year, I also talked about Corpse Bride on Codo Cinema Horror Month last year.
Yes, this is my first Tim Burton film. This is basically my first time talking about a Tim Burton movie with my brother Mark.
So Ichabod was having a conversation with all of the members about the Headless Horseman, and Ichabod is scared shitless. Like you can the reason and of course this is coming from the story that they're talking about, and his hand was shaking on that little teacup. Like he listens to the story about the Headless Horseman, who was a Hessian soldier cutting off people's heads, and this was during the American Revolutionary War. By the way, the actor who played the the actor who played the Hessian Horseman, the Hessian soldier, or the Hessian trooper, well, it was Christopher Walken who played the Hessian trooper, and he had a blast in this movie. He had a fun time in this movie. You could tell he was having fun, but also at the same time, his role was very short because, obviously enough, the character's head had to be chopped off.
Yeah, until he gets it back. To which we're gonna get to that later.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get to that later.
But I didn't know that was Christopher Walken at first. I thought it was Ray Park.
That's actually true because Christopher Walken was not the only actor to play the Horseman. Ray Park, who's basically the stunt double for the Headless Horseman, during all the headless scenes, he does all the stunts. He's basically the headless horseman himself. And another fun fact too, Ray Park plays Darth Maul in Star Wars Episode 1: The Phantom Menace, which also came out in 1999, which is also celebrating its 25th anniversary as well.
May the Force be with you.
So basically, the Horseman, like, obviously, you know, the Horseman's coming back. Is coming. Like, he's basically a ghost at this point. Kind of. Like, we see the entire body of the Headless Horseman. So, this is where Ichabod begins his investigation. Skeptical of the paranormal story, boarding at the home of Baltus Van Tassel and his wife Mary Van Tassel, who's being played by Miranda Richardson. And, of course, he is taken with Baltus's daughter, Katrina. When Jonathan Masbeth was killed, Ichabod takes Jonathan's son, young Masbeth, under his wing. They both exhumed the victims on a tip from Philipsey, learning that the widow died pregnant. Ichabod later witnessed the horseman killing Philipsey shortly after. He and young Masbeth and Katrina venture into the woods, where a crone witch reveals the location of the horseman's grave at the Tree of the Dead. But before we get to the Tree of the Dead, we get a scene where Ichabod was riding his horse under that bridge. You know that bridge from the original Sleepy Hollow films that Disney did?
Yeah.
And then he gets chased by the Headless Horseman with that burning pumpkin.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we get to see that, but unfortunately, like, Ichabod Crane gets knocked out by that pumpkin, but unfortunately, it was just a fake out. It was just basically Casper Van Dyne's character, who, this character was being a little dick for, you know, staging this incident.
Yep, that was a fake Headless Horseman.
Yeah, Bron Van Brun was being a fake Headless Horseman. He just did this to tease Ichabod Crane. Like, come on, what the hell, man? You scared the living daylights out of Ichabod Crane.
Speaking of scariness, there was a flashback of young Ichabod Crane and his mom.
That's right, because Ichabod Crane has a close, you know, basically very close to his mom.
And to which his mom is played by Lisa Marie.
And now we go back to the Tree of the Dead. Now, the Tree of the Dead is just basically, you know, how do I say this? How do we describe this, Mike?
Well, the Tree of the Dead, it has blood in it.
Yes, blood. It was a bloody tree.
Ichabod actually feels the tree, well, basically one of the barks of the tree, and he touches it, and he sees blood. He was like, oh my god, blood. And he also picks up the axe and tells these two kids to stay where you are. He actually he's trying to chop out one of the branches. He chopped out the first time and blood came out. He chopped it out again. Even more blood came in, and it actually sprayed on Ichabod's face. And what comes next? He opens the tree up and discovers a bunch of heads popping out of the tree. It was basically a collection of decapitated heads from the Headless Horseman. That's a scary way to say peekaboo.
Even Ichabod was scared. I mean, that is sick and disgusting. You know what's kind of crazy too is the blood. Like, did you know that's not even real blood? Wait, did you know something about that blood?
No.
Like, that blood, like, that's not the type of blood you see in real life. That is like blood, prop blood that you see, and this blood is pure red. Like, this is like the blood you probably see at a Halloween store, like prop blood.
I'm pretty sure they use fake blood.
I mean, obviously fake blood, whatever. I mean, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, fake prop blood, fake blood. That is pure red right there.
Yeah, and
that's actually the only type of bright color you see in this movie is the blood. I mean, sure, yeah, you see a few other colors too, but in terms of bright colors, you see red, because all the other colors are just basically colorless. Black and white, gray, maybe a couple of other colors behind it too.
Yes, and also since you mentioned the heads, Richard Griffiths' character's head got cut off.
That's right, he got decapitated in that movie too.
Especially after all the sheep starting to run away. Because the Headless Horseman was coming.
Yep, the Headless Horseman was coming. To the point where the Headless Horseman was coming out of that tree.
And not to mention, Richard Griffiths was known for playing Uncle Vernon in the Harry Potter films.
Yep, that's true.
Alongside Michael Gambon and Miranda Richardson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and by the way, the Headless Horseman coming out of that tree, that is basically a gateway. That is basically a gateway to hell.
Well, before that, Ichabod was digging up the soil.
Oh yeah.
And they actually saw a skeleton without a head, especially the sword.
Referring to the Headless Horseman.
Yes, there was no head.
There was no head at all.
I believe that's one of the reasons why the Horseman was out there taking heads by chopping off.
Don't you think this movie predated Tim Burton to direct 2010's Alice in Wonderland because, you know, the evil queen, off with your head!
Well, probably.
I don't know. I mean, don't quote me on that, but I'm just like,
I'm pretty sure that's basically an Easter egg.
Off with their heads! Yeah, but anyway, let's move forward. So later that night, the horseman slaughters the village midwife and her family. And this is actually a pretty crazy action sequence, too, because we see this family who's basically hanging out for the night, and the Headless Horseman comes in uninvited, swinging his weapons around. And by the way, that is Ray Park doing like the weapons twirl with his axes. Like, he is basically doing this, he's doing the husband, and the horseman literally gains the upper hand, or the upper axe, if you want to call it, and chops off his head. And then, of course, the horseman also kills the wife, too. And then the kid, there's also a kid in this movie, too, who's basically being hidden under the floor.
The Headless Horseman was about to leave, but until the kid was under probably like a basement or something.
I don't know how the Headless Horseman realizes that, but he probably heard the kid. Hey, are there other senses without a head? Well, he's got his hands.
True. And the strength.
He chops up the floor like it's nothing and takes the kid.
And then Casper Van Dien heard the scream.
Yep. Yeah, Brom. Brom was out in the distance. He heard it all. So he picks a fight with the horseman. Like, he wants to, he wants to take out the horseman. Him and Ichabod try to, fight the Headless Horseman. And,
actually, Brom used the sickles. And Johnny Depp was like, wait, he's not onto you. But Brom was like, I'll get him.
Like, he wants to stop the horseman. That's what he wants. And of course, wants to be the hero of this town. And I'll be honest, both Ichabod and Brom were able to hold this fight pretty well. But of course, knowing the fact that the horseman stabbed Brom's leg with a knife, and then on top of that, or dagger. It was a dagger. Like, he stabbed Brom in the leg with a dagger, and then once they crossed over that bridge, the horseman he literally jumped on the roof of the bridge instead of going under the bridge.
Wow, I feel like he doesn't want to go under the bridge.
Yeah,
because he cannot enter there.
Yeah, he cannot enter there. He can't enter there. And then Ichabod gets stabbed in the chest. Gets stabbed by the horseman. And what comes next is Brom trying to fight the horseman. And then what comes next? The Headless Horseman decides to cut Brom's body in half.
Ew. And all the blood splattered.
Yeah, so basically the Headless Horseman killed Brom. Well, at least he didn't lose his head.
True.
Damn, that is brutal.
I especially love the original score of Danny Elfman.
Yeah, Danny Elfman. I mean, this is not your typical, sad music from Danny Elfman. This is intense, haunting music from Danny Elfman.
Pretty sure he literally did that for Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness.
That's true, yeah.
I mean, is there anything we need to say about Danny Elfman?
I mean, yeah, he has done a lot of musical scores. He has done a lot of musical scores, but is most notably remembered for collaborating with Tim Burton and Sam Raimi as well. Jiminy, I wonder how different this film would be if Sam Raimi directed it. So anyway, all the other things are going on in this movie. Basically, the doctor was able to heal Ichabod's wound, and then Katrina was, comforting Ichabod Crane. And then, of course, all the other things are happening too.
We also get another flashback sequence with young Ichabod, and including his mother, to which his mother got killed from his husband, to which he is played by Peter Guinness.
Peter Guinness, I believe that's how you say his name, Peter Guinness. Yeah, Peter Guinness.
In flashbacks, Ichabod's fanatically sadistic father who tortured and killed his wife for practicing witchcraft.
Oh boy! So wow! Ah shit! Wow! And he's Lord Crane.
Yeah, no shit.
And dang, and he killed his own wife. And that was a bloody scene.
It came out of the tube was Ichabod's mom.
And then of course Ichabod wakes up from the nightmare, and of course it's Katrina, comforting Ichabod Crane. And it's a very cute moment too between the two characters. Like they share a pretty cute conversation with the two, and I think it's a pretty cute moment. However, later on we found out there's more accusations going on. Peter Van Garrett has secretly married the widow, writing a new will that left his estate to her and her unborn child instead of his grown-up son, Dirk, the second victim. And then, of course, we also find out that Katrina burns the evidence of the accusation. Hardenbrook commits suicide, and Steenwick conveys a town meeting to discredit Ichabod. But Baltrus bursts into the assembly at the church, announcing that the horseman has killed his wife.
It's not true.
No, it's not true, because the wife was still alive. The wife is basically, spoiler alert, it's basically Miranda Richardson's character, Lady Mary Van Tassel.
And she was with
Jeffrey Jones's character, Steenwick, during that one scene. She basically she sliced her own hand, spreading blood on his back. And then on top of that, the horseman attacks again. But this time, right outside the church.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the horseman cannot enter the church.
No, I mean, the horseman cannot enter the church at all. There's a barricade. There's I want to say barricade, but a little bit of a force field too, I want to say.
Not to mention his axe was dissolved.
Yeah, his axe dissolved. He threw it in front of the church, but no, but then it dissolves.
And a lot of people are starting to shoot at him.
Yeah, everybody, all the townspeople were starting to shoot at the horseman. I mean, the horseman can't die. He's already dead. He's basically immortal at this point.
Yes, and of course, Michael Gambon's character tells him, if each person lays a hand on me, we'll get a bullet!
He's referring to Steenwick and Lancaster. Steenwick literally grabs Baltus. He grabs Baltus, saying, You destroy us all! You're the one the horseman wants! Yep, and then of course Ian McDermott's character of the Doctor, the Doctor, Dr. Thomas Lancaster, was saying his last few lines. Your four friends played you fool. It's time to confess our sins. Confess. Time to confess. Spill the beans, tell the truth. What is going on? And right before Thomas Lancaster tries to say something, Steenwick grabs a crucifix and hits Lancaster over the head, causing a deep wound, and Baltus Van Tassel shoots Steenwick in the heart, and also his wig comes off too.
Yeah.
and that's like a chain reaction going on right there.
Yeah.
And then of course, Baltus just basically tells everybody to stand back. He was holding a gun in his hand, or a what was it? What's that gun? What's that gun called? Something like that. I forgot what the name of the gun is called. It's like a musket. Probably a musket. I think it's a musket.
Yes, he was telling everybody to stay back.
He tells everybody to stand back, and it was like, there's a conspiracy here, and I will seek it out. What he doesn't know is that the horseman was grabbing this little this little spear, this little
one of the fences.
He grabs a part of the fence, that has a sharp object on it. He chucks it into the window, chucks it through the window, and impales Baltus. And Katrina screams in agony, witnessing Baltus getting impaled and dragged out of the church.
And of course, getting his head cut off.
Yep, the horseman cut off his head. The doctor, Steenwick, they're all dead. You can see the blood pouring out of their wounds.
And I don't know what happened to Michael Goff.
I actually don't know. I think he died in that movie.
Yeah.
I think Michael Goff's character died in that movie
After having a conversation with Ichabod.
Yeah, and then of course you notice this pink drawing in the circle. Actually, another color we see is like this pink purplish chalk drawing that resembles something. I believe it resembles it's like an evil 5-pointed star. It's like the I wanted to call 5-pointed star of evil. I want to say it's a symbol of something, but I don't remember. It's like an evil 5-pointed star that she drew, and I believe this was. I think she was controlled by someone. So anyway, initially concluding that Katrina was controlling the horsemen, Ichabod later discovers that her diagram, which he believed summoned the horsemen, is actually one of protection, and that Lady Van Tassel is actually alive and the real culprit. And Lady Van Tassel kidnaps Katrina, who explains her true heritage from an impoverished family evicted years ago by Van Garrett, when he favored the Van Tassels instead, and that she betrayed the horseman to his death, and stole his skull to control him. She swore revenge against Van Garrett and all who had wronged her, pledging herself to Satan. No! Why did she do that?
She's making a deal with the devil.
Yeah, Lady Van Tassel is not coming back from that. Let's move forward. And so basically, Lady Van Tassel swore revenge against Van Garrett and all who had wronged her, pledging herself to Satan, if he would raise the horsemen to avenge her, and also to claim the Van Garrett and Van Tassel estates, uncontested. Manipulating her way into the Van Tassel household by murdering Katrina's mother, Elizabeth, and seducing Baltus to marry her. She used fear, blackmail, and lust to draw the other elders into her plot, having eliminated all other heirs and witnesses, including her own sister, who turns out to be the Crone Witch who aided Ichabod. Basically, Lady Van Tassel had a sister. Remember that sister in that one scene?
Yeah.
And that sister had a conversation with Ichabod, and that weird CGI effect with that witch?
Yes.
Yeah, that was basically Lady Van Tassel's sister.
She killed her own sister.
Oh my goodness, yeah. And then Lady Van Tassel summons the Headless Horseman to kill Katrina to secure the fortune for herself.
And of course, she has the head of the Headless Horseman.
The skull itself. And then, of course, obviously Ichabod Crane, and then I believe it's the son, by the way. I think it's the son, the little boy. Remember that little boy in the movie?
Yeah.
Young Masbeth, I believe that's his name. Yeah, young Masbeth, who's basically with Ichabod, rescuing Katrina inside this windmill. By the way, nice little callback to Frankenstein, because obviously in one of the scenes in Frankenstein, there's a windmill. Remember where the mob was going to that windmill?
Yes, and of course, not to mention the Frankenweenie movie.
That's true, but that's years after. That's years after Sleepy Hollow. So then, like, Ichabod and Masbeth rush to the windmill as the horseman arrives, and we get a pretty crazy action sequence where the horseman chases Ichabod all the way up to the top of the windmill, and the horseman chops the ladder, and on top of that, the windmill gets burnt, and we get this nice little funny quote that it was a quote about the horseman, like when the windmill was burning.
Yeah.
I think one of the kids, I think it was either a young Masbeth or Katrina, who said, "Is he dead?" But Ichabod was like, "Well, that's the thing. He was dead to begin with." Yeah, he was still alive. Not even a burning windmill can take out the Headless Horseman.
Nope.
we get to another action scene, and it's actually probably the best action scene in this movie, in my personal opinion. It's when Katrina, young Masbeth, and Ichabod are riding this carriage, and the Headless Horseman chases after the three. And the stunt work in this movie is pretty cool too. It's like you have Ichabod Crane hanging onto the carriage, riding a horse, and of course fighting the horseman on top of the carriage without being decapitated.
Yeah.
And of course, Ichabod even grabs onto the horseman's neck. Like, there's no head.
Yeah.
There's no head. I mean, it's all visual effects. I mean, here's the thing: the visual effects on the horseman, like, it's really, really good. Like, you don't see the head. You don't see Ray Park's head, nor Christopher Walken's head. It's basically visual effects. I believe they put in a very special mask or cloth or hood to put on Ray Park's head, just to cover the head, but also edit out in post-production or digitally removed in post-production. Like, you don't see the head. You just see the upper body, the whole body without the head. That's how good the visual effects for the Headless Horseman is.
Yeah, I'd say the visual effects in the Sleepy Hollow movie holds up very well.
Well, let's be honest. There are a couple of visual effects, there are a couple of CGI moments where it got a little crazy or ridiculous, especially that one witch scene where Ichabod was having a conversation with Lady Van Tassel's sister.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a couple of weird CGI moments in that. Yeah, Ichabod and the horsemen fight on top of the carriage until Katrina, young Masbeth, and Ichabod got off the carriage, and Ichabod is being dragged being dragged to the ground, while the horseman gets thrown off of the carriage, and the carriage lands on top of him.
That didn't help either.
But that was a crazy, crazy stunt right there.
Yeah. But until we get to that final confrontation.
The final confrontation where they're at the Tree of the Dead. Ichabod retrieves the horseman's skull from Lady Van Tassel. But unfortunately, Lady Van Tassel shoots Ichabod. But unfortunately, what she doesn't know is that Ichabod had a little book inside of him.
Yes,
which he had throughout the entire movie.
Yes, and then we get Danny Elfman's score.
His score keeps on going. When the horseman walks over to both ladies, and I'll be honest, the horseman's pissed off. He's like, "All right, let's get this over with." Like, he was ready to decapitate Katrina.
And of course, Ichabod was attacked Miranda Richardson.
Yeah, and of course Miranda Richardson, or Lady Van Tassel, gets knocked out by the kid. Lady Van Tassel gets knocked out by a large tree branch, and of course Ichabod gets the skull. He calls out the horseman, saying, "Horseman!" He chucks the skull to the Headless Horseman, like he catches it like it was nothing, and puts it back on his head. And the transformation, while very good, but also creepy too because of the CGI effect. Like, it looked like an actual cartoon, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Something you probably might have seen. What is it, Scooby-Doo?
Yeah. Where are you?
Ha ha, very funny. But anyway, after that transformation, we see Christopher Walken in full form as the Hessian Trooper.
Yep, and especially the horse finally returned. Christopher Walken's character, the Headless Horseman, he doesn't even talk.
He screams, "Ah! Ah! Ah!" I mean, come on, that's funny. Good use of Christopher Walken, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta give credit to Christopher Walken. He does a fantastic job in this movie.
For the short time that he was in this movie, he's still good.
And then he was able to bring in.
So before the horseman leaves, he picks up Lady Van Tassel, and right before he jumps back into the tree, he gives her a kiss of death.
Oof.
And it's bloody too. You see the blood on both of their lips. Like, he is biting into her lips.
Yep.
Like, even she was shocked by it. Hey, Lady Van Tassel, this is what happens when you make a deal with the devil.
Yep, she got what she deserves.
Oh yeah, she got what she deserved in that moment. Like, when she crossed that line, there was no turning back right there. That evil witch got what she deserved. And then the horseman rides off into the tree and takes her back to hell.
Ah!
And then the last thing we see is Lady Van Tassel's hand.
And we actually see the scar in her hand.
Oh, she still has the scar on her hand.
Well, on the palm.
On the palm of her hand. Ichabod faints, and the three go back to New York City. So with the crime solved, Ichabod returns to New York City with Katrina and young Masbat, just in time for the new century.
Actually, Katrina gives Ichabod a kiss
On the cheek.
And he was able to wake up, and of course they started a new century. And of course, she was also wearing a black and white striped dress.
I had noticed that. She's wearing, to anybody who probably seen this movie, if you notice at the end of the movie, the dress that Katrina was wearing, it was basically a black and white striped dress, which resembles the black and white striped suit that Beetlejuice wore in the first Beetlejuice movie. Nice Easter egg right there, Tim Burton.
Yep.
And of course,
it actually snowed.
And of course, it snows, just in time for a new century.
And that is basically it.
That's basically it. That is Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow. And I gotta say, I enjoyed this movie pretty much.
Yeah, same here. I had a lot of fun with that movie, despite the scary elements.
Despite the scary elements in this movie, it is a pretty good movie to watch. I mean, sure, it may not be everybody's favorite movie, but at the same time, it's a pretty good movie to watch.
I mean, it may not be Tim Burton's best film to direct, but he still does a very good job directing it.
Yeah, you could definitely tell the direction that he was going with in this movie, especially the whole, this is basically, like a crime thriller, right? Instead of the original wasn't much of a crime thriller. It was just, the original was like your typical story by the fireplace. This one this one is just basically a typical crime thriller. And I'll say this, I enjoyed it.
And also, Johnny Depp did a fantastic job playing Ichabod Crane.
Yeah, all the cast members did a pretty good job with their roles. The music by Danny Elfman was good. Cinematography was pretty good too. Even the stunt work in this movie was pretty good too, but most notably in the final act.
Including the art direction.
Yeah, the art direction was very gothic.
And also the costumes.
Costumes was very good too. Even to this day, I still love this movie to this day. It's not my favorite Tim Burton movie, but it is a pretty good Tim Burton movie.
Yeah, same here. It may not be the best, but it still holds up 25 years later.
Yep. And that is pretty much it. That is the breakdown of Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow.
Yep.
But anyway, to anybody who's listening, what did you all think of Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow? Did you like the movie? Have you seen the movie? Did you think the movie was okay? Did you think the movie holds up to this day? Was this a lot better than the Disney version of Sleepy Hollow? Do you think it exceeded what the original Sleepy Hollow was like? Love to hear your thoughts.
By the way, Mark, thank you so much for having me back onto your episode of Codo Cinema to talk about Sleepy Hollow. And this is basically my first Tim Burton movie review with you.
Yeah, you're welcome. But anyway, that is a wrap on this episode. Thank you all for tuning into Codo Cinema. I'm your host, Mark Codo, aka Codoman.
And I'm Mike Codo.
Remember to watch movies, stay positive, and good night. Until next week.